Hi, my name is Hari Srinivasan. Welcome to our town hall discussion, Shaping the Future of Work. WorkingNation and the Los Angeles Chapter of YPO teamed up to bring you tonight's conversation here at Hangar 4 at the Nuys Airport. I think it's a pretty cool setting. I've never had a conversation in an airport hangar before. It's a fitting backdrop since the aerospace industry is grappling with the very topic we tackle tonight, how to meet the shifting demands of the workforce as innovation changes the way that we do things. The industry is working to meet FAA mandates as part of the next generation air transportation system. It's an overhaul of the way that we fly. Everything from how the air traffic control towers can communicate to pilots, to the angles that planes take off and land, to shorter and more direct GPS-based routes, which will mean less time and fuel wasted in the air. Aerospace companies, big and small, are seeking solutions. So here's one example.
I went to community college and I took some of the classes. I really didn't have an idea of what I wanted to do. I decided to go travel for about a year. When I came back, I decided that I wanted to go directly into a trade. I met Mark Schmaltz, and he's just had me under his wing this entire time, and I really owe him a lot. My name is Isaac Gonzales. I'm a mechanics apprentice and an avionics technician.
Isaac Gonzales was a young man that had some experience restoring old cars. We set about to turn him from someone who barely knew the front of an airplane to someone who could be an avionics technician.
Avionics is a bit mysterious in the fact that only a set group of people know about it, and if you want to learn about avionics, you go to those people and you kind of study under them.
ADS-B, which stands for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, means that every airplane is broadcasting its position and its speed and altitude, and other aircraft can receive that same information. The mandate that's coming at the end of 2019 is every aircraft, except for the smallest sport plane, has to be upgraded. The expense is going to be in the tens of billions, but the biggest challenge is trying to find qualified technicians to perform this work.
The mechanic's role has kind of moved from like a wrench-turning mechanic to more of an IT guy. We're in a transition period where new people are coming into the industry and other people are exiting, and the shift is now.
Taking someone off the street from scratch is one solution. The industry would benefit enormously from having some sort of electronic course of study that could bring a candidate along in a very short period of time. There's going to be a mad rush as people realize the deadline's coming. It's not going to be pushed back.
In a comparison from now and when I was going to community college, I know what I want and I have my eye on that, and I'm working to get there.
Come on. Now to our panel. We're just getting seated here. Everyone up here tonight is in some way working on the solutions to meet the needs of the future workforce, but with different approaches, different insights. Michael Kelly is the Executive Director of the Los Angeles Coalition for the Economy and Jobs. The coalition is made up of leaders from business, labor, academia, and nonprofits. Michael works with them to create public-private partnerships aimed at increasing economic growth. Enrique Cruzalegui is the Vice President of Burning Glass Technologies. Burning Glass is a data and analytics company that tracks the labor market in near real time. Aanand Radia is the Managing Director of University Ventures. It's a venture capital and private equity fund that focuses on what the firm calls education to employment pathways, among other things. And David Seidel is the Deputy Education Director at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He's also the manager of the STEM elementary and secondary education program for JPL. So let's start with this skills gap problem that I think that we started to hear about a little bit in the video. Michael, I want to start with you. When you see this kind of as a big picture or a 10,000-foot view, how significant is it in this region and for this industry?
Well, first off, I think it's been an issue for decades. I think you're talking about next-gen technology. This has been debated in Washington for more than a decade. So I think it's, historically when people were educated on the job, they're educated through union membership, they're educated through universities. I think it's trying to figure out is what I think a lot of these kids, we got to start further down and You think you could lose a kid if you don't get them involved in engineering at 3 years old. And I think we were trying to throw a lot of money in the community college system, but we really haven't paid attention to a lot. And we're kind of trying to keep up with it. But we've had a skills gap, and I think people maybe haven't been paying attention as much as how much we've lost in our manufacturing base and aerospace base here in California for multiple different reasons. But I think there are some better solutions, some good solutions out there, and but I think it's going to take the employers kind of reaching down further into the K through 12 system to build that pipeline. They always say it's going to take too long, but I think we're seeing by ignoring that, we're in the situation we are.
Before we can reform the K through 12 system, it looks like 2020 is a deadline, and that number of 100,000 possible planes grounded before then, if they're not up to speed, caught my eye, and probably someone else in the audience as well. But is there a gap there that community colleges can fill if there is this incredibly pressing need?
I think there is, but kind of going back into its exposure.
Yeah.
It's some of these kids in the community college system. Here at the Coalition, we've been creating partnerships with the community colleges and the Cal State University colleges, and we're providing grant dollars. We're creating these public-private partnerships, but what we're finding is these kids aren't aware. They're really not aware that we're going to put $120 billion into our public transportation system, and we need people who are going to understand how to fix these railroad cars. They don't realize, our biggest exporter has been aerospace and commercial aircraft, but they're not aware of, when you think about having worked at Boeing, how many engineer jobs are out there? People just think in a general term engineer and don't realize how many different engineers jobs exist. So I think it's number one is we got to get these people more exposed to what's available. So therefore then we give them the resources when they go into the community college to understand why they're there. And then providing the mentoring and the training, because some of it is they can get the skills, but if they don't know how to shake hands or show up on the first day of the job, then they're not going to be successful. So, yeah.
Enrique, tell us, first of all, a little bit about how it is that you're able to monitor the labor market in real time, and then we'll get to kind of what you're finding in this region and in this industry.
Sure. We're basically monitoring over 50,000 websites, corporate sites, most of them. So we're pulling in live jobs as they're made available, as they come in. So we're really watching this big radar of all this data coming in, really, pardon the cheesy pun. So we can really see and track, and we also have a unique capability of actually reading the job descriptions and requirements and pulling out the skills that customers are demanding. So we have a pretty good set of eyes in terms of what employers are asking for. And what we're seeing more and more is an increase in a hybridization of skills. So these are skills that are pulling, or jobs that are pulling in skills from multiple different disciplines and putting them together in a way that they're not being taught in K through 12 community college and so on. So I think a new set of thinking is required to be able to produce that pipeline of talent that you were talking about. But the need is definitely there, and also the data literacy and the ability, digital skills are becoming much more important in jobs that historically didn't really require them at all. You're seeing them everywhere. Coding skills in machinist jobs. You have to write a little bit of coding to work the equipment. So these are new skills that are now becoming a requirement in order to gain access to these positions.
So why does Mr. Schmaltz have to take time and try to find Isaac and keep him here? What is the likelihood of Isaac once he gets trained up to get a job in the LA area? How in demand is it?
It's very much in demand. LA metro area are looking at about 9,300 jobs that we tracked in the last 90 days. It's a significant number. It's a very competitive number. We use a metric called location quotient, which sort of tracks the level of recruitment intensity in the job market, and the LA metro area for aerospace jobs tracks at about 2.2 according to our location metric quotient. What that means is basically it's over twice as competitive as the rest of the US for these jobs. There are a lot of fishing poles in the water looking for a very small pool, and the number of days to fill those jobs is significantly higher than what you see in the national average.
David, he mentioned something that this is almost kind of a mystery or a secret job. He had to know someone who knew someone, that there weren't that many people thinking about it, or that this wasn't something that maybe he was approached by in high school. Why is that?
Well, avionics is definitely a mysterious field. So grant you that, no question about it. I think it goes back to, I think, something what Michael said too, in that you're talking about a potential workforce as they're growing up that has no idea the nature and the scope of jobs that exist. So in the last few years, there's been like talk about how jobs that these students will have haven't been invented yet. And it's like, okay, that may be true, but what's the pathway to get them to where they want to be? So first off is exposure, that at JPL in particular, in the science and technical world, you do find out that their inspiration came at a very early age, that they knew when they were in 3rd grade or something that they wanted to be an astronomer or study the planets or something like that. And what happens is a lot of our communities, especially in Southern California, where you have communities of recent emigres to the United States or that are disadvantaged in terms of economics, is their parents, as committed as they are to education of their children and other students, just are not good consumers of the opportunities that are out there. And they don't have a chance to hear about careers like astrobiologist or avionics engineering technician or designer or things like that. And so one of the aspects of it, just to absolutely echo what Michael said, is to really spread the word into these communities about the kinds of opportunities that are out there. And you don't take for granted when you look at an airplane that, well, there's 4 forces of flight and it flies, of what's really encased in the entire notion of flight and sustaining that and moving on. And until students are inspired in some way to go into a particular field and then get some mentorship to help them along, it's going to continue to be challenging to just present the opportunities to them.
Anand, one of the things that we always hear is that I have a tough time that there's just not people in the pipeline that are ready to do the jobs that I need them to do today. So first, I guess, explain a little bit about University Ventures' approach to this and what you're doing.
Sure. So we believe that employers are going to continue to kind of act in that same way, which is what Peter Capelli of Wharton calls, kind of the Home Depot approach of hiring, which is they want the right part right when they want it, and they want to be able to kind of go to their corner store and get it. If you look at kind of other countries that have much longer lead time training programs, there are countries like Germany, for example, which is the model that everyone looks at and says, we should have someone training for 3 years for these avionics positions, but that's just not the way our economy is planned and built. And so, at University Ventures, we acknowledge that, right? Employers are worried, what happens if I train that person and they leave? And then that's a really valid concern. And so what we're trying to do is to build intermediaries that would provide that training, and the employer would gladly pay for the right part or the right employee at the right time. So, in the case of avionics, if the numbers are right, I will go home after this and say, if I were to build a program to train in avionics, would that be of sufficient market size? Would the economics of it work? Because clearly the demand is there, and clearly there are employers who want to be able to hire someone who's vetted, trained, and ready to contribute from day one in not just the technical areas, but also what I would call general workforce skills. And so it was interesting, is one of our biggest challenges in launching any one of these highly niche programs is educating people about these careers, and we see this across all the different niches that we provide this pathway in, regardless of what the role is, whether it's sales or data science, financial services, healthcare, getting people education into what the daily tasks are associated with those jobs is actually one of the hardest challenges, which is surprising to many people.
You've said things in the past too, similar to Mr. Kelly, which is that the education system as it is leaves some of our students woefully unprepared. Explain that.
Sure. So, our education system, by and large, how a university class is taught or course is taught is much the same as it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and maybe even 200 years ago. But, as you saw from the video, the pace of innovation is only going to get more rapid. The shelf life of skills is only going to become shorter. And universities have this unique element to them in that they all want to be like Harvard and Stanford. And they all want to be producing academic research, and the reality is, what the workforce by and large needs are people who are trained to contribute from jobs on day one. And so, universities often say, we don't prepare students for their first job, we prepare them for their 5th job. And there's good reason for that. Again, as you saw in the video, things are going to change a lot. You want to have the ability to adapt, and you want to have the general liberal arts skills, which are less likely to be, taken over by a computer, right? The ability to relate to another person, to communicate. So there's a lot of reasons for it, but most of it's just, it comes down, higher education in our country has not needed to change from that old model because they haven't had any financial incentives to. That could go even further into how they're financed, but that's primarily the main driver of that.
David, you work with education systems, graduate and below, and even in high schools. I mean, what are you seeing? How are we adapting fast enough?
Well, JPL is spoiled in the sense that who doesn't want to come work for NASA? So we don't, our challenge is when we find strong candidates that they might get sucked away by other software companies or something like that where the perks may be better. So we try to be competitive about that. But I think one of the interesting things, what Aanand said, is that universities are training for the fifth job. Maybe not is a good idea. Maybe a better idea is just train, starting in the kindergarten level all the way through however much college, is train learners on how to continue to learn. So at JPL, we may be hiring someone in for the job that we need them for. So if we need a thermal engineer to work on spacecraft systems, we can hire one of those who's just graduated from the university with all the bona fides that they need. And that job will last some period of time, and then that job is going to end. And their group supervisors then stuck to find their next piece of work. Well, they might have a project manager working on something completely different that doesn't care about the fact that they were a thermal engineer, but they know they've done good work and were creative and delivered on the product. And they want the person, not the skill set. And so you find people that come to JPL, and after 15 years, they've had all these different jobs, only one or two of them that they actually were trained for. And if you reach the top of the food chain, the project managers that are responsible for mission success, they've had a bunch of different jobs. And in some cases, they actually made the trip from science to engineering. They had a complete discipline change. But if schools can just focus on having as broad an education as possible for the students that are going to be in flexible work environments, then that would be as advantageous as possible. And then where opportunities exist for something in a specialized area where schools can focus, and that's what magnet programs frequently do, is give kids a leg up and an advantage in a particular content area for which they've demonstrated an enthusiasm and an aptitude. Then you're filling the pipeline with all sorts of different types of learners and people with specific skills where that's needed. And I'm not that familiar with the German model, but you're not taking students too early and then tracking them for the rest of their lives, which can happen in systems that are overly structured.
And you've got a lot of paid internship programs as well, right?
Yeah, so JPL is totally committed to the idea of interning. It's really not the students in interning, it's really mentoring. So JPL at the moment is about 6,000 people, a little over 6,000 people, and we have 1,000 interns over the course of the year. And Enrique can check me on this one, but I'm going to guess that's a pretty high fraction over the course of the year. 700 during the summer. It impacts the cafeteria and the parking lots and other functions as well. But these are students that are embedded in the work of their mentor and the work group. And it's not to get work done for JPL, it's for their educational experience and advantage, and it feeds back to their curricular work. But it gives them a chance to work in an environment that is realia. And they can find out whether they've got an aptitude for it and an enthusiasm for it. Because the worst career in the world is the one that you don't like and you're no good at. So if you can learn that early on, that either it's not right for you, you've made a decision in time to save yourself. But if you decide this is the thing you're going to do throughout your academic career, you can come back and do other internships. And JPL's got a really good tuition reimbursement program, and we can make those kinds of investments and try to retain talent that way.
Michael, what about the changing demographics? How much should a region, an industry, the country be concerned about the number of people who are going to retire out of their jobs, who've had 20, 30, 40 years experience and know-how to do something, and is there someone ready to take that place?
Yeah, and that's a big issue. If you look at some of the migration outside of California because of high cost of living tied to housing and all the other things that cost to live out here, we're losing a lot of these people that they come here, whether they're educated here, they stay here for a little bit, or we do a great job of pulling a lot of talent from around the world, but then they start to mature and either settle in, they look at they want to buy a house and they're sticker shock. And the loss of the state and local deduction doesn't really help on that thing too. But I think it still goes back into the way the coalition has approached this issue in workforce development. Is I talk about the K through 12, but there's the immediate need, right? Who are those people that we just give them the skills and the resources to get the current jobs? And there's a big push on this thing of subsidizing the first year of community college. We look at it, it's wonderful, but that's not the biggest inhibitor. You start realizing, going back to the trends, like I think it's like 78% of LA Unified of 600,000 students is Hispanic. And if you look at who's going, the Cal State system, what really blew me away is 50% of the workforce of Apple is from a Cal State school. 23 campuses here in California. And these kids are getting in, they're starting in the community college. Anywhere from like 35 to 40% of the kids going to a Cal State, which is the most kids matriculating there, are coming through the 2-year programs. And so it's kind of, we've been looking at, you know, what's inhibiting them from graduating in the 4 years or getting through the 2-year program. And you start noticing it's the things that a lot of people aren't paying attention to. It's a lot of them don't have access to healthy food, or just food in general, don't have access to babysitting services to be able to take care of the kids when they're going to go do a program, or just housing, during the winter break and housing. And then they don't look at a big inhibitor. If you want someone to learn how to fix an aircraft or fix, you know, space module or anything else, is books and tools. Books and tools can run $5,000, $10,000. So if someone's already giving up a part-time job to go to school to get the skills needed, you got to figure out how to support them and make sure that they can graduate in the 2 years to be able to get to the Cal State. But once again, getting them the, you know, that exposure. And just kind of, you know, Anadolia's story is one of the things we are supporting at Cal State Dominguez Hills is, if you look at a big issue is nobody in these underserved communities in Los Angeles really see a science teacher, a credentialed science teacher. And so we are sponsoring a program where we're going to take the new math and science curriculum that was supposed to be instituted throughout the nation that really hasn't, and nobody's really aware of that, and we're going to make sure that we create this curriculum for underserved schools in Los Angeles, but not just kind of develop the curriculum with a teacher. We're going to support the teacher. We're going to support, you know, what's going on in the classroom. And then we've got, through the thanks of Toyota, Fab Labs. So Cal State Dominguez Hills is going to put a Fab Lab on the weekend. They're going to go into these underserved communities and expose kids to robotics, 3D manufacturing, and everything else. But going back to the demographic shift, when they first did this, a lot of people from, these people, you know, from, say, the Hispanic community, they come in, they get exposed to it, their kids see it, but then they didn't show up the second weekend. And they had to go reach out to them and say, what happened? It's like, well, it's just games. There's a lot of toys and stuff. They're not really learning anything. So it's the kind of that education. And just my last point on this is that you go to an open house at JPL, it's amazing. There's not an empty spot. People are craving access to this stuff. And so we just got to kind of figure out, how do we create these more open houses? How do we reach down into these communities?
Anand, how do you create curriculum like the type he's talking about at scale?
Sure. You know, we think about it more in the last mile training perspective, so it's beyond K-12 at that point. But what we really think about is, you know, identifying those areas of skill gap, and then, you know, curriculum is a fixed cost, but with technology being what it is these days, and, you know, not to reference the video so many times, but, you know, when they talk about the cost of computing power going down, the cost of connectivity, right? You know, all those things play into the marginal cost to distribute a lot of this information is fairly low, right? So if you were to create, to go back to the example in avionics, if you were to create a program in avionics, my guess is you probably couldn't do that completely online, but, you know, you could probably spend a reasonable amount of money, maybe $100,000, and create an online avionics program to, one, educate students as to what it was, two, to gauge their initial interest and aptitude and actually work them through some material and assess you know, how well they learn that material. And, you know, that would be kind of the first layer that would then decide whether they you know, we're then going to move on to the in-person immersive. So we're big believers in that in-person immersive component. But the combination of technology and not losing sight of that in-person immersive makes the economics of it work quite well, especially when you think about the opportunity cost of having all those grounded planes. So it really comes down to technology and then staging it properly.
Enrique, as you see billions of resumes sort of in the aggregate, where are the skills gaps most pronounced? Meaning, when these resumes are coming up into the pile, what are the industries where people are just 15%, 20% away from even being considered by a hiring manager to say, okay, you can come in for an interview?
It's a tough question to answer because it varies from industry to industry, but we're seeing that, I think the big skill gaps is in combinations of skills. You're seeing this, like I said, this hybridization of skills. It's not so much that there's one skill or two skills missing, is that more and more you're finding employers asking for workers that are able to work on systems. They're pulling skills from multiple areas. It's much more complex. that takes years of experience. So coming right out of colleges, you don't have that. You don't have that experience, which is why internships are so important, which is why apprenticeships are so important. So I think that the best way to answer that question is or the best way to address that problem is to just provide exposure for students as early as possible into what exactly employers are looking for. What are those unique combinations of skills that they're looking for?
Are employers adding in apprenticeships? Are they baking in internships? Are they baking in the training because there seems to be a gap between what someone came out of school? They might have a credential, they might have a certificate, a diploma, but it still doesn't meet the needs that they have to fill.
I would think so, just judging off of the time it takes to fill these jobs and how the difficulty that they're having in finding workers. I would agree with that. I mean, we're really looking at what signals are the job market sending back to us, right? So we're really kind of watching the market and what's working and what's not working. But I think that's a fair statement, I think.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, from what we've seen, there's been a big push, both in the Obama administration as well as in the current administration around, you look at what's happening with student debt and with unemployment and skills gap, and they're talking about apprenticeships. But what we're seeing on the apprenticeship front is one where we spend a lot of time thinking that there will be a future for this. There's significant growth in the UK in apprenticeships, and that's been in the last several years. Employers in the US are still hesitant to go down that path and make significant investments, and a big part of that is just cultural. They're scared of making the investment of time and money. And the other thing comes down to scale, right? So many employers are small and medium-sized businesses. So to go investigate what an apprenticeship is going to look like, to administer that apprenticeship program through many bureaucratic processes is difficult. And then, to have to amortize the cost of that curriculum or training program over, call it 5 employees, doesn't make sense for small and medium-sized businesses who are the ones most in need often of these skill gap areas. So you've got a bunch of kind of factors running counter to actually get some of those programs implemented at scale that we need to.
Michael, we heard about the internships that JPL has, and it's a luxury to have 1,000 interns, but the businesses, the smaller business that you talk to, what's the tipping point for an employer that convinces them to overcome the challenges that Aanand just mentioned?
I think everybody's trying to figure that out. I mean, look at it. The bigger picture, too, is you've got a lot of people chasing fewer jobs. Going back into the thing of, I was employed at Boeing from 2006 to 2010. Before I started, when they took in Rockwell and Hughes and other companies, employed up to 90,000 people. When I arrived, it was 36,000 people. Today, it's probably down to about 12,000, 13,000 people, and the jobs have changed. The facility I worked out of in Seal Beach was all military. 90% of the business at Boeing was military, and that building is filled by all commercial aircraft. You think about where some of the direction is going on, working on support and maintenance of all the stuff that they're selling.
David, one of the things that's intriguing is that you're not just full of rocket scientists. I mean, you've got quite a few, but your staff mix for a project is not all PhD level physicists. You've got a big mix.
Yeah, that's right. For the technical staff of the lab, that's about 3/4 of the laboratory. It's a split, bachelor's, master's, PhD, and that includes a science division where pretty much everybody has a PhD. That's one of the rites of passage for a science career, but in engineering, not so much. And we have plenty of community college level people in there as well. So my best example of that is the fabrication shop. So at JPL, we're one of the few places in the world that can do an entire mission from a Sparky ID on a napkin all the way through the data collection and analysis. The only thing we can't do is launch from Pasadena because of the neighbors. But one of the aspects of that is we have a fabrication shop, and we farm out a tremendous amount of work. About $500 million of lab work goes out in contracts. But you can have something that's being developed iteratively at JPL, and you have someone who's got a PhD in mechanical engineering who's trying to get this gizmo to work. And he or she is working alongside someone who didn't think school was all that cool, but went through a trades program and is not only technically proficient at CNC machining, but also has the artistic skill as well. So I didn't realize that until I learned a little bit more about that. So you've got someone who has a lot of education, was really good at it, and someone who basically has found their niche at a community college level. And the two of them are working side by side, and neither one of them can do the other one's job. So the whole idea of systems thinking is not just in engineering, but it's also just in how you deal with a system of people and what needs to be done. Because, I mean, the joke is that you can't launch the satellite until the stack of paperwork is taller than the rocket. Okay, so now we're digital, so that won't work anymore. But it's so much of this integrated combination of skills.
Speaking of satellites, you've got one, or a facsimile of one. Can you explain what this is?
Sure. So this is called a CubeSat. You can guess why. It's a cube, yes. So one of the challenges so I've been at JPL for about 28 years now. When I came to JPL, I think there were 3 spacecraft in space and 3 spacecraft in development. So these are $1 billion or $2 billion missions. They have a decade-long development. And then you put it on top of a rocket that may or may not blow up, or you try to land through the atmosphere of Mars, which is always going to be tricky. So the cost of access and entry into the system has always been very, very high. So in the last few years, the notion of CubeSats has been developed. And this is full scale. It's basically 4 inches on a side. And what you can do is build out the interior essentially any way you want. And this one would be covered by solar panels, so it didn't even have to be controlled. And these things go up whenever there's a major launch out of the Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral, or Vandenberg Air Force Base, where there's some paying customer who's got $1 billion spacecraft sitting on top of a $100 million launch vehicle. These things aren't that much to carry along with them. And so a launch might go up with the primary payload paid for and everything, and these things as not parasitic, but going along for the ride. And then once this gets into orbit, then these things are chucked out. Typically, if there's a SpaceX orbital ATK resupply mission to the International Space Station, they're carrying cargo for the crew and everything else, but they're also carrying a bunch of these. And there's a dispenser on board the International Space Station that can put these out. So this is important because the cost of building a satellite can shrink into a bunch of these, and you have a network. And this is very important for bringing internet to the third world in particular. We have swarms of these things up in space. But locally, you can have a school that has its own space program. And there are examples of high schools that are building CubeSats that have or will fly in space. And we're here at Van Nuys Airport. Cal State Northridge up the road here is flying CSUN Sat-1, which was built and is operated at Cal State Northridge by undergraduates in engineering. It's flying a cold battery technology for JPL. So all of a sudden, now you don't have to wait until you've been in the career for 20 years before anybody lets you touch flight hardware. Now that might be on your application to college.
So Aanand, how does the education system shift to deal with that reality, that there are now technologies available that was 3D printed? You know, this is something, literally somebody designed a satellite that could have been printed at a fab here in the city.
Yeah. I actually think it enables a scalability, right? So, in the example of whether you're learning, any skill trade or a high-tech skill, the ability to go, get real live experience, practice on those specific softwares or technologies clearly has come down so much that you can be doing it at earlier levels and spreading it to a wider group of people to get, both that experience and access that everyone's kind of talked about is so important. I just think there have been two, in the case of JPL, right, it's this, as mentioned, spoiled for choice, and kind of at the top of the heap, right? But when you think about similar ideas and technologies applied more broadly across many different professions, industry verticals, actually embraced by the education system, everyone recognizing that not everyone is going to be a rocket scientist, but maybe I can get my students who aren't tracking. It's not going to be like Germany where we're going to put them into a track, but the students who are not tracking to become a rocket scientist, I can get them experience on systems and processes that may be something that piques their interest. All related to the same cost of technology, bringing it down.
Michael, I know you work with the Los Angeles Trade Technical College. What are some of the things you're doing to try to catch those students that might not be headed to the PhD program, but could have a very good job at JPL?
Sure, and back to the point about where we're going. I think for a number of years that the aerospace industry became kind of staid and boring. They lost a lot of engineers in the first 3 to 5 years. Some of the things, if you've got to work on a satellite or a large aircraft, in a sense, you're working on PowerPoint for a couple of years, and you're working on a very specific piece. And I think a lot of people don't realize with the onset of new space, and the onset of people don't realize, I bet you a lot of these kids couldn't name any CEOs of the major aerospace companies, but they know who Elon Musk is. And they probably don't know that, you've got Richard Branson's people doing work down here, and Jeff Bezos, people doing work down here. So I think it's kind of added a whole new element when you talk about the cost of fuels going down and additive manufacturing and all this other stuff, to be able to have these, lend a kind of a new sexiness to out of space. But some of this is tied to, people forget too, is you think about unmanned vehicles. Some of the companies are looking at unmanned vehicles as we haven't mapped like 90% of the world's oceans. So there's potential, kind of going in that direction. Now to the point of back of, we looked at, the community colleges and trying to get these folks ready. Going back, one of the things that we worked on is books and tools. A lot of the political class and everybody else is focusing on that first year of free tuition, but once again, that's not the biggest inhibitor, is going into, being able to pay for some of their, the higher cost items to get them the skills to get to where they want to go. But we've been very specific of, choosing these students who are kind of not just in most need, but they're, the most motivated. And as we give them the books and tools in their second year, they can, they have access to taking those tools on with them. But, a big part of it is that trust. I think there's been a lack of trust between the private sector and our workforce development system and our community college system and some of the other university system. And so we've got to kind of figure out who can come in the sense as, a validator, kind of an honest broker, and saying, hey, if we work together and partner on these programs, really the big key is at the end of the tunnel, you've got to provide an opportunity, or they're going to be disheartened. They're not going to know where they're going to go. So you've got to build the trust with, these local businesses. But that kind of goes back to, and I think I didn't end my point well, but making that point about you still got to be able to create jobs. And that's one of the biggest things here in California is, historically, we've done the research here, we've done the development here, we've done the production here, and then you've got more support and the maintenance here. But a lot of times, look at the C-17 program, building something, an actual aircraft. And now you got, building satellites, a lot less people, much higher end. So sometimes you just, going back to the internship question, is you can't give these young kids access to the floor in a lot of these companies. You can give them access, I think, to this aircraft for the oversight, but sometimes when you're dealing with classified and everything else is, when I worked at Boeing, I couldn't bring my kids in. I expose them in different ways with a little aircraft I can bring from the gift shop. But it comes back to that, most people get jobs through friends and networks and exposure and know about it.
So, sorry, go ahead.
That's it, I think.
So
my point.
This is a kind of a jump ball question for all of you. Is there a role for government in how we deal with this transition? If so, what is it?
Yep, I think government can play a huge role. They can help make sure that skills are being communicated to the education community, to the job seeker community. We've done some really cool things. We did a great project on cybersecurity, demand for cybersecurity skills with CompTIA and with NIST, just to show what the market demand is and what specific skills are required. What do you need to study? What do you need to be good at to become a cybersecurity professional at an entry level, mid-level, advanced level? And at each step in that career ladder, what is the market demand? What jobs, to your point, what are the jobs that are waiting for you if you go down this road and you get those skills? Who are those employers? And I think a good role for government to play is to be that honest broker and to put that information out there so that somebody that's about to start a career at community college understands what's in it for me to invest my time and money and not take that part-time job and really struggle for a while to get those skills. What awaits for me at the end of the tunnel? So I think that's a huge role that government can play.
Yeah, as we think about it, it's really a level of transparency, which Enrique just alluded to. So what jobs are out there, what skills are required, in different educational programs that our finances as taxpayers and government's going to, what kind of returns are they producing? At a very granular level, returns by cohort, by major, so that's one, and then the appropriate financial mechanisms that kind of enable how education is going to have to be delivered. So if you look at education today, schools get all their money up front, regardless of whether they do a good job or not, and it's really engineered around these 4-year chunks. When the reality is you should be incentivizing high ROI programs that are just in time instead of just at one time. And so those are really kind of two of the biggest things, and then accountability. for people who don't provide that level of transparency, nor can provide the ROI for their students. Now, if government did all those things, you'd probably see educational institutions change very quickly, how they built their systems, and numbers in both, unemployment, skills gap, and as well as underemployment, which, is a real problem as well.
I'll give you an answer that's not really workforce related so much as structural to education in K-12 in the state of California and a number of other states, but not nationally, and that's the fact that we've, in California, implemented the next generation science standards. So people have heard a lot about Common Core, most of it negative. It wasn't Common Core for math and English language arts. It was the instruction materials that came out claiming to be aligned with Common Core that weren't, that really got a lot of flack. But the next generation science standards does not list the entire sum content total that students have to absorb to be considered scientifically literate. It's much more narrow focus in some areas in terms of the depth. The complaint has always been a mile wide and an inch deep in terms of science content. And if you don't believe that, open a biology textbook. But the idea is to get a deeper understanding about what the processes of science and engineering are. And now with the next generation science standards for K-12, on every page is the performance expectations, which are the standards themselves, but also the science and engineering practices associated with that and the cross-cutting concepts. So in the previous set of standards, that was kind of like at the back of the chapter, and no one ever got that far. Here, it's there. So it has the advantage of at least getting students when they're young to think critically in scientific habits of mind. And even if they don't go into a science or technologically significant career where they rely on that, they're learning critical thinking skills and how to be objective. And I think, especially in your line of work here, you've seen a slippage in objectivity, not you or the NewsHour, big fan, but in the case where people are reacting or hearing about stuff. And my favorite thing is the increase in the number of hits on YouTube about flat Earth videos. And it's like, somewhere in your educational system, someone let you down in terms of the area of critical thinking. So at least the next generation science standards are the law of the land here in the state of California, and we need adequate professional development for educators, classroom educators. We need effective instructional materials, and it needs to be rolled out. But we have a chance now of getting students to kind of think in a scientific or engineering habit of mind, starting literally in kindergarten.
So I think one place where the government could do a lot better is the Workforce Investment Act and the Workforce Investment Boards. People don't realize that here in Los Angeles County alone, through the workforce investment dollars, spending $100 million. And you still ask yourself, with the amount of people that are not skilled, or a lot of people who are filling empty jobs, what's really happening with those dollars? So I think there's got to be, you call it a workforce development system, but I think there really is not a system. Some of those dollars do flow into community colleges and they're helping with different things. So I think that should be a topic of conversation moving forward in 2008. I think nationwide it might be $600 million. And that's not counting, I think, the Department of Labor, Department of Energy, and all these other programs that are helping fund things in the community. With return on investment hasn't been that great. I think where they've done a great job is, people aren't aware of it, the Cyber Patriot. Cyber Patriot program is going with the universities, and even going down to the middle school, the high school, but a lot of universities, and teaching the learning, the skill sets around cybersecurity, teaching it like a sport and a competitive thing, and getting people kind of hooked on it. But it's still kind of hard getting people to pay attention to it. Some of these universities that I know, that Cal Poly Pomona, more engineers from aerospace are hired out of this university, but you go through the labs, and nobody's willing to fund the applied research. Nobody's willing to fund the infrastructure in these labs. They're big on basic basic research, which is really important. But when it comes to the applied research and all that, I think they're short-sighting themselves of not putting in the resources that are needed for the kids that really want to do this stuff. So.
Finally, what are the consequences if we don't adapt, or if we don't get this right? I mean, what do you see on a national level, or for education, or for how different industry or region changes or doesn't change if we just sort of do the status quo?
Pretty dire. I talked to the head of HR for a public utility that said a full 1/3 of his workforce is eligible for retirement with benefits. And we're not making enough nuclear engineers. This is dangerous stuff. It's pretty mission critical, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, just to think about it in kind of a dollar scale term, you've seen the explosion of student debt, over the last 15, 20 years. You know, we have $1.3 trillion in student debt. It's the largest type of debt, you know, other than mortgages. You know, we estimate about 500 billion of that is bad, right? Should be written off by the government, but it's in no one's political interest to be the one to do that because people just aren't paying on that. And
500 billion with a B, just so.
About 500 billion, yeah. So that's counted as current, but it's not amortizing or not being paid at all. So just interest only. And so and the government is saying, well, you know, this doesn't go away ever. In fact, we can just garnish Social Security wages if these students don't pay it back. So, you know, that as if that's a okay answer, because what you just end up with then is a whole bunch of people who are destitute in retirement, right? And that's already starting to happen. And so 20 years from now, that would be you know, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people homeless because, you know, they're past working age and they aren't getting Social Security checks.
Or they co-signed a loan for their child, which we've done stories on this.
And I think the reason I think we're seeing it now, the impact of not paying attention or doing as much as we should is there shouldn't be a conversation about universal income. You know, people should, you know, work defines us. Our skill set defines us. What we get up and we do every day, you know, defines us, allows us to provide a meaningful life. And I think we're short-sighting ourselves and short-sighting a lot of these folks if we're saying, and that's where, I mean, if we're saying you're really, you know, kind of just stay over here and be a consumer. And I think, the more and more kids I see when we do these programs and set up these internships and we grant things, we give them access to, you know, high cutting edge equipment over at the Clean Tech Incubator and all these other opportunities, you see the light bulbs go off in these kids' heads. And you see all the things that they want to do. You know, public bus transportation could stop at every solar powered, you know, every stop could be solar powered and they can re-energize the electric bus from there. You know, coming up with these wonderful ideas. And, you know, I think, you know, we were talking earlier about this term, you know, mid-skills career. I mean, it just sounds like kind of you know, you're not a PhD from Carnegie Mellon or anywhere else, you're just kind of a mid-skilled person. And forgetting about the trade. Everybody talks about trade schools and the tracking. But at the end of the day, a doctor, you know, has a trade, a lawyer has a trade, venture capitalists, it's all trade. So I think it's part of what I think it's phenomenal about WorkingNation and Art and his team are doing is it's changing the narrative. It's taking a very difficult subject matter and communicating in a very effective and eloquent way. And I think more people have to stop and take a look at it and pay attention that everybody has a role to play in the success of our economy.
There's a microphone down here. I encourage you guys to just step up and ask a question if you'd like of what you've been hearing so far. In the meantime, while they line up, Enrique, you did something in New York that's kind of intriguing. I just want you to share that with the audience based on what you were seeing in that market. Tell us a little bit about that, the cluster of engineers that you were able to tell.
Yeah, so this was a few years back. So we worked with the governor of New York. Basically, we took a look at their entire database of unemployment claimants, and we analyzed all of their resumes to try to figure out what do they have a lot of, what skills do they have a lot of, and we identified that they had a huge cluster of folks with experience in semiconductor manufacturing. They just happened to be clustered in the Rensselaer and Saratoga area. We mapped this. The state of New York was able to use this information to go out and attract prospective employers. And there was a company called Global Foundries that was going to move their facility out of the US. And they changed their mind looking at that and all the package that the state put together, and they decided to build there. And the economic impact, as you can imagine, of a wafer fab is pretty major. I think the build-out cost is $4.5 billion, but the economic impact is you know, tens of billions. So the reason why the information became so attractive because they were able to take a look at, okay, how can we analyze the skills that these people have? You're going back, and what are the combinations of skills, the unique combinations of skills that workforce has? And it goes down to that level. It's the skills that are important, really. It's not so much the title or the degree. It's what skilled trade, what skill do you bring to that trade?
All right, just state your name and who you're with. Yep.
Hi there, my name is Madeline Alfano. I'm the owner of Maria's Italian Kitchens. We have casual Italian restaurants in Los Angeles. And I'm a member of the California Restaurant Association. And our industry struggles with finding skilled workers and people that are passionate about, I mean, Italian, you got to be passionate about the food. So the California Restaurant Association several years ago started a program called Pro Start, where we fund high schools with culinary arts, kitchens, and we combine the restaurant industry funds it, as well as manufacturers for the tools and the books. And I actually personally funded the adjudicated Camp David Gonzales, where the bad boys go, and we funded them in a culinary arts program. So my question is, you know, education and manufacturing and people that are wanting these trades or this education, have you reached out and try to put them together for the collaborative effort to help in education? Because vocation, as you said, vocation or occupational, those were bad words. You know, you didn't want to say, oh, I'm going to vocational school or technical school. And so my question is, where are you bridging the industry with the manufacturers of the tools and the books to get into the hands of the students, so that way they can become the employees of the future?
Michael, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, that's part of what the coalition is about. You know, we started 9 years ago now as a bipartisan, independent group of, you know, thought leaders from business, labor, academia, nonprofit. You know, the other day we met with the head of the Labor Federation, and one of the topics is one of the fastest growing jobs is, you know, hospitality. You know, tied to, you know, restaurant, hotels, and everything, the amount of, you know, tourism and tourists here. And I think the unions have put together some great programs. But I think it's a matter of, I mean, there's some out there that are more successful than others. But I think it's just, once again, getting all the different people in the room together and trying to figure out whether it's someone who is the largest automobile dealer in the region and talking specifically to, you know, what they need in a workforce. But I think it still kind of goes back into that building that trust. It's not just we're short of mechanics who understand the technology in the car. Is do they trust hiring something from a community college? Where do they, you know, where do they find their pipeline? Because that's what we've been relying off of, you know, the cannibalizing from other businesses, people jumping back and forth. And so I think it's just kind of continually getting all the right people at the table together and starting building that trust once again that, you know, our community college system has a lot of great assets, a lot of great programs, and kind of getting them up to speed. But once again, I just think there's a lot of, sometimes do we place our expectations on these kids thinking that they want to fill all the jobs that are empty, that you require the skills to get them, as opposed to we're trying to find that some of them, you know, don't want to do certain things that normally people used to do.
We're hiring.
Okay.
No,
So if I could ask a question. So one of the things that you've got as an advantage is good publicity. There's all these TV shows about cooking and things like that. There was a show just about bacon. So it's like, how can I get that job? Are you finding that people are seeing celebrity chefs and competitions and things like that and wanting to aspire in that way?
Those are the employees that want to make $100,000 when they walk through the kitchen.
I can imagine.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, and it is. I have to tell you, the Pro Start program in the high schools has been very successful. We've built more and more kitchens throughout California. And we not only teach them skills in the kitchen, but also how to run their own business. So they're learning, you know, what a balance sheet looks like, you know, food costing, recipe costing, how to hire, how to go on an interview. And the California Restaurant Association really, we have a serious employment issue. We need really people that want to come work for us. So we've invested the time in the high schools, and we do reach out to the chefware, you know, to donate uniforms, and the knife companies to donate knives, and trade supply to donate paper. There you go. Okay, so it is there is more excitement about being in the kitchen, but bottom line is sometimes you got to wash dishes. Yeah. And it's not a pretty job, and it's a hard job. There's many hours in a hot kitchen. It's not easy, but yes, that has helped.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Valeria Rico. I'm the CEO of GGA Solutions. It's a business process outsourcing company focused on financial services. But my question has more to do with the jobs we haven't talked about, because I've heard a lot about science, technology, engineering, but what that always rings with me is that when you look at the statistics, 25% of high schoolers are not proficient in math. Most bachelor's degrees today are focused on economics, business management, humanities, liberal arts. How do we resolve for the fact, because what I'm hearing is that all these new jobs are technology related, but the reality is that most of our students are graduating with the belief that they are not good at sciences and that they shouldn't focus on science jobs. Most kids give up on science, quite frankly, even during high school, and it's even worse, I think, with women. So how do we manage that, or how do you account for all the people that are not going to be the technology, the scientists and the engineers? What do you have to say about those kids, which might be very good at other things, but not maybe have received the education or the formation or the expectation that they'll be able to excel or be a PhD or a rocket engineer?
All right, the job for the rest of us.
I'd say, just to validate what you're saying there, algebra seems to be a tremendous gatekeeper. If kids can get through algebra in 8th grade, they're going to have a much better time of it. Part of that is, I hate to say this, I sell out my colleagues here, but better math instruction. And sometimes that means going forward by going into the past. The old drill and kill worksheet, most of us learned through memorization of the mathematical functions, and that was kind of necessary. There's no shortcut to that necessarily. So it's the avoiding, when I was a kid, new math, whatever the fad is in terms of instruction. There's always this myth about education being this big mystery and difficult to assess and everything else. And it's like, no, it's going on in classrooms every single day, and there's lots of success stories, but there's this tremendous disconnect between the academic educational study of what education is and classroom practice, and that's a barrier that's typically not crossed. But again, it's a problem, and I don't know what the solution is, but as school districts become more and more under pressure in terms of budget and finance, you start to shed things like librarians and nurses. And now you have counselors at a high school who have 600 students they're responsible for. And they can barely manage the paperwork to make sure those students are scheduled into classes so they graduate. There's none of this, here, let's talk about what program at what university might be right for you. And that's a big gap, because in many cases, parents don't know the answer to those questions either. They can't give good advisement. And as I mentioned earlier, especially in communities that are underserved in some respect, their parents just are not good consumers of the opportunities that are out there.
Just to kind of add to that, so to kind of answer the first question and the second question, we believe one of the primary intermediaries that are going to solve this problem are actually staffing companies. So staffing companies, a lot of what they used to do and the ways they used to add value have been disintermediated by technology, and rather they have companies coming to them now and saying, more strategically, how do I solve this workforce issue? And so what we've been doing is buying or investing in staffing companies that actually create talent supply chains. So they look at the Burning Glass report and say, I need to create, and talk to all of their employer clients and say, I need to create training programs in these areas. And we bought a company last year that focuses exclusively on helping recent grads find their first jobs. And so, what's most interesting about this that we found is that most people coming into this program are graduating from traditional four-year universities, and they're saying, I was an English major, I went to my career office, and they told me to become an editor of a newspaper. Well, yeah, thanks. There's like 4 of those jobs out there. Not particularly helpful advice, because that person hasn't had a tremendous amount, who's giving that advice doesn't have a tremendous amount of experience about what jobs are available. And so much of the time that we spend with those people that we're helping to find jobs are educating them not just about the careers that are out there, but also what their competencies are. So, okay, you're an English major, but how do you feel about math? Well, I wasn't great, at calculus, but how did you do in algebra in high school? Oh, that was easy, right? That was easy. Well, you probably have a proficient enough understanding of math to do to do a financial analyst job. Actually, we put them through an assessment, and we're like, yeah, they would be perfectly able to do this, and by the way, they have great communication skills. So, a lot of it is not just educating students about what jobs are out there, but actually educating the students themselves about what competencies they have, because often they don't know.
Liberal arts major here, art studio. Now, if you told high school me that I was going to build business software for 16 years, I would have thought you were nuts. But it turned out that I had a pretty good knack for it. I started, doing, web app development and web page development, and migrated into business software. And there's a lot of skills, and they call them soft skills or foundational skills or what have you. The ability to think creatively and communicate. And I think one of the things that we ought to be doing with kids at the high school age is explaining, what does it mean to do that job? I mean, let's get down to the exact day in the life scenario of what you would be doing in this position, and do more laboratory style teaching as opposed to just filling in bubbles and Scantron tests. I'd love to see a bigger investment in that, in showing kids at a younger age what it would mean to go into a specific profession, and how do your strengths play into that.
Okay, next question.
My name is George Sugarman, and I'm in sales. And as a follow-up to Valeria's question also, and a comment that I'd like to make, is that, what about all the non-scientific technology? What about the sales people of the world, or the people who do the expediting, or the people that are the clerks of the world? And what are we going to do with them? But my real question is, and this is a pet peeve of mine, because I've listened to high school commencement speeches, and they always talk about following your passion. And these kids are getting this message of following your passion. You got to follow your passion. And are we doing a disservice to all these kids by telling them that you have to be passionate about this job? Are they finding these jobs, well, that doesn't sound sexy enough for me, and that doesn't sound, because it seems the millennials and other people looking for jobs that they want to be passionate about. And when I talked to my kids about that, I said, gee, I went into my dad's business because I really wasn't that good of a student, and I just kind of fell into it, and it just evolved. And like Enrique, I kind of evolved into the business mode and got excited. But the passion thing, I think we're doing, and I'd like to hear your comments on that.
I got a pretty strong opinion on this, actually. I think it assumes, it's pretty patronizing. I always hated that speech because it assumes high school seniors have figured it out already. And a lot of us, especially me, no clue as a high school senior. But instead of follow your passion, discover your passion, and here's how we'll help you discover your passion. Through lots of internships, through lots of kind of dialogue with professionals, lab-style teaching. That's what I would love to see. Not, oh, you high school seniors, you figured it out. Go do what makes you happy.
It's the right message. It's just giving it the wrong time.
Yeah.
In the pipeline, it still goes back into discovers. I think we shut down opportunities. Like I tell my three daughters, as they're still young, but in a sense is, yes, be passionate, try to figure out who you are, as a parent, provide the guidance. But you start to discover the little inhibitors that don't provide them the opportunity to explore, to be curious, and so people don't realize that these kids are going to the community colleges. The amount of math and reading, the remediation, the amount of money, that's where some of the workforce development dollars have to go into, because we haven't paid attention. You can't criticize somebody for not being, because you need math as a salesperson. You need math, adding up something, you're running a restaurant and everything else. But if you don't have someone who's credentialed in a math class in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, then you've already lost them. So you can't make up for it in one speech. So I just think it's just like, if you want a real solution, let JPL take over Disneyland and try to figure out really people to kind of explore the passion for how the world works, how to make analog and digital and all that other stuff works.
I recently saw a study that asked a bunch of school-age kids later in high school what jobs they wanted, and it was basically like 80% of kids want jobs that don't exist. Right? They all want to design video games and make music and do 3 or 4 other things, which is frightening, right? Because they're also getting this message of college for everybody, no matter what college, no matter what the cost. And you combine those two messages, and it is extremely misleading and forces you down a path of low employment, high debt. when the reality of the message they should be getting is, find out what your skills are, work really hard at it, and you'll probably enjoy it, right? If you can figure those things out, and great if you get to, you'll become passionate about that, right? So yes, I agree with you that that's an issue.
Ma'am, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jenna Snyder. I am an account executive at Skyline Exhibits, Greater Los Angeles, and I'm a millennial. So I am 23 years old. I just graduated from Drexel University.
Are you following your passion?
I actually am. More so, a little. I have to get there. It's going to be a process, but. So something really cool about Drexel University, if some people don't know, we do 6 months of school and 6 months of a paid internship. And we do that so by the time we graduate from school, we have 3 jobs under our belt. So I tried everything from the nonprofit sector to education, and now I ended up in sales. So I guess my question for you folks is, a lot of my peers going through the system and looking for these jobs through our university to then go out and do these internships, there weren't a lot of opportunities provided by employers. So something that we discussed during this talk is that, employers taking the risk and going out of their way to, invite these college students while they're still in university to go and do these jobs, while they're still learning and trying to find these skill sets and to find out actually what they like. So how do you suggest encouraging employers to taking a risk on these students and encouraging them to take the next step to engage them into the next generation of the workforce?
Well, I can take a shot at that because JPL essentially has a success story associated with that maybe we should be communicating better. Our former director basically said to Human Resources, I don't care what the hiring situation is, I want you to hire somewhere between 85 and 150 what we call early career hires. And the director's office subsidized the managers that hired those people in. So these are students that are between 1 and 2 or 3 years of their latest degree. It could be bachelor's or a master's degree. And so that had the advantage through, and a great many of those are supplied through the internship program. So the internship program set the stage to audition students to meet a hiring need to prevent the laboratory from, as Enrique mentioned, just getting older and nearing retirement, and frankly, the lack of diversity you find in the older workforce. So it opens up a whole bunch of opportunities that enable the future of the company. And at places where it works, I think probably could do a better job of just publishing on that and sharing that story so that other employers can say, my circumstance isn't so different that I couldn't adopt that as well. I mean, my group is getting older and whiter and closer to retirement, and that we're not getting the benefit of youth and diversity in our company. How can we fix that? Interns, early career hires, career path.
I was just saying, you hit the nail on the head, is you got to find the champions within the organization. Some companies have more internships than others. It's usually kind of driven by a leader that potentially was affected. They were mentored at some point in the line. So it's finding these people in the organizations, whether it's the CEO from top down or whether it's a mid-level manager. Because I think we need to get away from it. Like someone once said when I started this job, it's like, I want somebody thinking about the economy. I want somebody thinking about good paying job creation day in and day out. Because you could go visit a school for one day. You could have somebody come in and visit a campus for one day. But I think that it doesn't stick. It's kind of, you got to get that stickiness. So whether it's in the organization, finding the champion that's willing to take on either someone as an intern or mentoring somebody, or then finding the exposure. I think it still comes back into that day we visited JPL and it was just overrun. There's so many people that want access. It's kind of like the grove of STEM. So many people want access to stuff like that. We have to figure out how do we create more spaces like that where people have this opportunity to go and kind of interact with other people. Other than that, it's just a kind of a faceless resume or somebody shooting over LinkedIn and all that. So I think you just got to go find the people that use the word passionate about understanding, building that pipelining, paying forward what they were potentially given.
So the old joke is kids are interested in ghost dinosaurs in space. Only one of those has abundant career opportunities.
All right, we want to thank all our panelists for their insights today. So this is a conversation that continues on our website, WorkingNation.com, and you'll find us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So for all of us at Working Nation, thank you very much. Have a good night.